excited and hopeful. The first subtype of breast cancer to talk about is HER2-positive breast cancer. There's a very obvious therapeutic target that sits on the cell surface and therefore is accessible to antibody-based therapies. And these have really transformed both the cure rates for HER2-positive breast cancer as well as improved the quality of life of patients with advanced HER2-positive breast cancer. And here we can talk about all sorts of varieties of drugs that have become available. But what we clearly see is that overall survival is being promoted both in the early disease setting and in the advanced disease setting. The second big group, of course, is the ER-positive breast cancers. These are the ones that are called estrogen-driven, if you like. These tumors have always been at the forefront of our advances, and we all know about drugs like tamoxifen, estrogen-lowering drugs like aromatase inhibitors. But still, it's a frustrating group of tumors where when the tumors become resistant to these drugs, we've struggled. But here, too, there's been advances with a class of drug called CDK4/6 inhibitors. They're like a spanner in the cell cycle work. They very strong anti-growth properties of these drugs. They're sort of reintroducing the cell cycle controls that the cancer cell has naturally lost. And these drugs are now being shown to improve overall survival for advanced disease patients, and they're under investigation in early disease patients. So I think there's a lot of interest there. And then even in triple-negative breast cancer, which is an unfortunate name because it almost implies you don't know what's wrong with someone, right? I'm telling you that you're not what you are. But even there, these tumors that don't express the estrogen receptor and they're not HER2 positive, and their prevalence is quite marked in populations, vulnerable populations like patients with African ancestry, for example. Even progress is being made there, really in the form of two types of treatment. One, treatments that are specifically designed for patients who have hereditary breast cancer. These are the BRCA1 and 2 population, and they disproportionately get triple-negative breast cancer. And here there's a drug called a PARP inhibitor. It's really like tamoxifen for these types of tumors that can be remarkably effective because these drugs target the vulnerability that these hereditary breast cancers exhibit in terms of how they repair their DNA. So that's a very cool development. And I certainly see quite a few patients now who've had remarkable benefit from these drugs that are pretty non-toxic. And then there's this huge area also of something called immune checkpoint therapy. I mean, if you just look at a cancer cell, and look at all the changes that occur in the cancer genome, it's completely amazing to me that how that genome could even exist, right? It's really, the cancer cell is drifting into a state where it's really another organism, right? An invasive organism, like a malarial parasite or like a virus or a bacteria, right? It's evolving into something that's not you. And eventually that trips the immune system. The immune system saying, this cell shouldn't be in my body. And you can really see this in the profiling studies. Some tumors are immunologically hot. The cancers, the body is trying to reject that cancer, just like it would reject a malarial parasite or reject a virus-infected cell. But it's obviously not effective enough. But now there's drugs which allow the immune system into the tumor and allowing the cancer cell to be attacked by the immune system more effectively. And right now, the activity of those drugs is most marked in the triple-negative subset. So lots and lots of different approaches, and a real reason for hope.
Yeah, lots of progress there. So because today's focus is on clinical trials, and we definitely will be covering that later on in this webinar, but I did want to ask you a question. These are lots of progress in these subtypes, but obviously clinical trials did play a role in that. So can you tell us a little bit about how clinical trials maybe help develop those drugs to get approval? And also, I think you kind of mentioned about how now they're going back to study these drugs even more.
Lots of questions.
You know me, I have lots of questions for you all the time.
Unwrap it a little bit. Okay. I I think that, first of all, in that paragraph I just gave you, washes over a lot of details. How many patient volunteers it took. It's extremely brave patient who sits with a medical oncologist, and it takes some fortitude on the part of the oncologist as well to sort of introduce this idea. We don't exactly know how to treat you. We'd like there to be a better world. The only way we can do that is typically compare two groups of patients, a group of patients who get the new drug and a group of patients who don't. And who gets what has to be a randomization. It's a coin flip. And the reason why that's necessary is otherwise the two groups would be biased, and then you might end up with a spurious result. And in addition, to show benefits, you need a relatively large number of patients because the disease is complicated. And so, you know, we sort of had to sit with the patient, and the patients often have been to the web and they understand it really as well as you do. You know, you're sitting there debating what the right approach, you know, is. But essentially, we have to execute these studies. We participate in it, obviously, with our patients every day. And I think that, you know, the biggest motivation I see for participating in those trials is what we call the altruistic one. They understand that, you know, we need to get to a better place with respect to how we treat metastatic breast cancer, still an incurable illness, and that requires clinical trials.
It's really about that patient participation, which I think is a great kind of segue into kind of our next topic that I know you and I are really excited to get into, which is, so I think there's all this progress being made, but now we need to know where to go. And so I'd like to learn from you a little bit about your vision for the future of research in metastatic breast cancer. And of course, I think, as we mentioned, the Brinker Award, you know, touching on a little bit of your background in diagnostics and kind of really getting out to that right diagnosis for metastatic that you always really eloquently talk about. So could you share a little bit of that vision with the audience? And we can break it down into pieces, because I know, again, that's a large question, but I'm really excited for them to hear that.
Well, I'll start my response by saying something really obvious, but something profound. You can't cure patients until you know what's wrong with them.
Right.
And when the drugs are failing, that's because you don't know what's wrong with that individual patient. So when you're seeing patients with treatment resistance, you've got to solve the riddle of why they're not responding to the drugs, one patient at a time. And because the human genome is complicated, you know, over 20,000 genes, over 3 billion base pairs make up, if you like, the blueprint of life. It's a complicated business. So one of the things that we're trying to do here at Baylor College of Medicine, and then wider at the National Cancer Institute with various consortia I'm working on, is next-gen diagnostics. Now, the general idea for next-gen diagnostics is some patients would be familiar with the idea of DNA sequencing, right? A sample of the tumor is taken and it goes off to a commercial company and they say, well, you've got mutation X, Y, and Z. And many patients also will be familiar with RNA profiling. So, for example, in early stage breast cancer, a little piece of the tumor goes off to a commercial lab and they measure various RNAs and they say, you're on a good trajectory with your disease, or maybe you're not such a good one and maybe you need some chemotherapy, right? Yeah. That's DNA and RNA analysis. But that's not enough. And it's not enough because the computer screen of life is made up of proteins. When I'm looking at your good handsome self, I'm looking at proteins functioning on a microsecond time scale. It's computer. The computer screen of life is made up of proteins. So how do you switch on the computer screen of life? Well, you need two things. A big fancy machine called a mass spectrometer that actually measures all the proteins. Now think about it. Breast cancer is diagnosed with 3 or 4 proteins: ER, PR, HER2, and maybe something called a Ki67, which is like a proliferation marker. And maybe if you're going to get immunotherapy, maybe one other marker which indicates whether the tumor is immunologically active. 5 proteins, right? Well, think about it. There's literally hundreds of thousands of different proteins and protein isoforms active to make up the computer screen of life. So these fancy machines measure a lot more of that universe. So typically, we can easily measure 10,000 proteins off a tiny little core biopsy that you already have information on the DNA and the RNA. and then you suck all that information into the cloud, because cloud computing is an absolutely wondrous thing, because you can basically use the power of the cloud to do a very intense computational biology experiment for that patient to try and work out what's wrong with them in a way that you couldn't before, because you didn't have the computer power at your fingertips. Well, you think about it, right? You go to your favorite movie server. That movie server is running a movie just for you, and halfway through it you say, I don't like it, it sucks, I want to watch another movie.
Yeah.
Well, think about the computing power behind that, and thinking how you can actually redirect some of that computing movement from leisure to solving the problem of why this patient not responding to today's therapy.
Right.
So we're combining these two worlds in a program here that I call phase 1 diagnostics, right? Because phase 1 diagnostics is, I'm going to try and find out as much as I can about you. I don't know yet whether it's going to be helpful, right? But I'm going to run the experiment. That's like a phase 1 drug. I don't know whether this drug is going to be helpful for you, but I'm going to see whether I can actually give it to people with a reasonable level of toxicity. So we want to put these things together, this phase 1 diagnostic program, and then link that to the availability of drugs that could interdict all this new biology that we're beginning to uncover literally daily. The host of graduate students that are sort of dissecting out what all this means biologically, and I think that will drive an awful lot of new approaches. But it's going to take, obviously, a lot of coordination and a lot of patient volunteers. But increasingly, Baylor, we see patients who want to come here for our diagnostic capacity. This thing of working out what's wrong with me.
Right.
So maybe you can find a solution. We don't guarantee we'll get to the bottom of the riddle, but we're beginning to set up a program where you could actually start doing that one patient at a time.
Right. So it's really, harnessing all of these technologies with all these new discoveries and trying to match the patient with the correct diagnosis, because there's all these technologies, and now we're trying to really harness those to help each individual patient. And of course, it's a really complex problem, but it's something that you're really deeply committed to, I think, especially with all your collaborators you mentioned here at Baylor and beyond.
Yeah, there's a lot of analogies with astronomy in some senses, right? There's huge projects, like the Hubble telescope, for example. Amazing if you go and look at the pictures from the Hubble telescope. Well, life is very like that, right? You're made up of trillions of cells. You're made up of a galaxy of cells. And each one of those cells sort of has to do a different function, and then those functions are obviously becoming disordered, and that's what we call cancer. So really, the Hubble telescope works because you built a telescope to gather the data, and then you use a lot of computation to analyze the data and understand the fundamental physics behind the galaxy and the universe. And we're essentially doing the same kind of thing, building a Hubble telescope-like microscope to gather all the information, and then using computation to order the information and create new diagnoses where there weren't diagnoses before.
Right. So I think that's a really great segue. And so in order to get all of those samples and to do all of those things that you want to do to really try to help people, there's really a really key component to that, is that we have to get patients and we have to get patient advocates involved. So can you talk a little bit about maybe your vision for that? And you obviously have a track record of working with advocates like myself and so many for years, and you've served so many patients over your career and people that you've worked with. So can you talk a little bit about your vision for that and participating in research? I know, again, it's a mouthful of a question, but I'm confident that you've got some ideas about that.
Well, I've been in cancer research for over 30 years, right? And 30 years ago, the way you would do cancer research, you would get something called a cell line, which is some cancer cells growing in a dish of sugary water with some amino acids and some electrolytes, and you sort of push those cells around the dish with various experimental techniques. But each one of those cell lines represents only one patient, right? So right now, probably the world's literature, there are 40 or 50 of these breast cancer cell lines. They're actually kind of hard to make, right? And so when you think about that, that is completely inadequate, right? Because even how can that represent the whole universe of breast cancer? So starting maybe 20 years ago, I started working on various techniques where we would get samples from patients. We've been able to get those samples of all those patients, and learn from each patient, one patient at a time, but also use the power of having a lot of information about what happened to that patient to drive information on which piece of information is most critical and which piece of information is druggable. And so what that really leads to the idea is every single one of the 150,000 women currently living today in the United States, and Lord knows how many around the world, is an opportunity to learn. And we need to connect those patients to a learning machine. And the only way we can do that is through social media. Because in social media, patients volunteer directly. We don't have to go to their healthcare system. We don't have to go to their oncologist. We don't have to go through a bureaucratic quagmire if the patients are coming forward and volunteering directly. And so, first of all, it's information gathering exercise. We don't know what's happened to the majority of those 150,000 women today living with metastatic breast cancer. We don't know how they were treated. We don't know what molecular tumor reports were generated on them. We don't know whether they responded. In other words, we're living in a pretty disconnected world in metastatic breast cancer. This is true, of course, for other forms of cancer as well. But if we can organize, I guess that's my thing, if we can organize ourselves around solving the problem, which first means understanding the magnitude of the problem, the nature of the problem, the types of experiences patients are having with today's standard of care, and then ultimately plugging that into that learning machine around their samples, I think we'll make a lot more progress. And I think that's the kind of thing where advocacy organizations, Susan G. Komen, that's a real contribution they can make, because it really is about learning from the patients, not those little cell lines that are useful for certain types of research. But this kind of research I'm talking about, that's going to really be a patient-oriented solution.
And that'll give us more answers. Because I think in my short amount of time in getting to work with you and other researchers, is what I've been able to observe is it's a really complex problem, and it's actually quite remarkable what you've all been able to discover and help patients with. But in order to get to that next level, it really does involve us all working together, I think the advocacy organizations, and I think that's also, kind of going outside of that, right? Trying to go around some of these systems and giving it back to patients. So one way that we do that, of course, is through the medical conference that you and I host together. Can you just touch a little bit about that? We just finished our 6th annual conference in Scottsdale with Mayo Clinic, and we had a pretty large patient involvement there with our researchers and of course, our clinical people. Can you just briefly talk about that?
Yes. So when I came to Baylor College of Medicine, you and I discussed this with Dr. Osborne, that we wanted to do this. He said, you're not going to compete with the San Antonio Breast Cancer Symposium. I said, absolutely not. We're going to make this different. Right. And what the vision was to get the patients and the advocates together with the scientists. It may shock you to learn that a lot of these people who work on breast cancer, they don't meet patients every day. Right? So first of all, to put a face to the audience you're trying to serve as a breast cancer researcher, I think there's intrinsic value to that, to getting patients and advocates together with the researchers with the initial idea. But what would come out of that? What would that interaction generate? And I think what it's really generated is this idea that we can generate these social media tools. We can work on these direct patient collaborative research projects. We can, the scientists are beginning to rethink about how they would do their research as a result of their interaction with the patients and advocates. I mean, this last meeting we just had in Scottsdale, it was about 50-50, actually, scientists and advocates, and I think that's about the right balance. I'd like to see even more advocates, and I think we can even do research at the conference. Right, and have people enter the details into the MBC Connect app that we're developing. So maybe that's a topic to.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's a really good segue. So I think talking about patients participating in research, and of course talking about different tools, I think I'd love to talk a little bit about MBC Connect. First, get your input on it, and then I'll go through kind of some of how it works. But I think this is an example about, how patients can get involved. And I think, so I'd love to kind of get your idea about that. And I think, of course, the other thing we would say is that please sign up. I think we're working a lot to try to get more people signed up because that, again, gives patients the opportunity to participate in research. And I think the last part of that, of course, is when this app was getting developed with, yourself and other doctors like Dr. Pluart at St. Coons, was to have it to working with, groups like Komen and BCRF and the Alliance, to have it controlled by these advocacy organizations. And I think that's also really exciting about this app.
Yes, I think you said a number of things that I think are really important about this. First of all, this took several years to develop. Secondly, it's gone through all the regulatory approvals necessary. It's institutional review board, certified. It's totally legit.
Right.
The second thing about it is it's patient powered. This only happens if patients decide that they want to participate in the activity, and they can participate once. They can participate multiple times. They can update their information. They can put their molecular data on there. And then when we have a sufficient number of subjects, we can obviously start looking at the information, but on top of that, it can be an engine to connect to the patient. Right? So a lot of these databasing exercises, they're sort of one way: give me your data, give me your samples, we'll analyze it, and we'll write a scientific paper. This is not what MBC Connect's about. MBC Connect, once it's fully developed, is about helping patients. Right. So I got a little passionate about this because I spent 11 years in St. Louis. Right. St. Louis is a city in the middle of the country with a very sort of diffused rural population around it. People used to travel literally hundreds of miles in their car to come and see me because things weren't working out so well at Cape Girardeau. Right? So the point about this is a mechanism to bring all those patients in play. Right? Because if you think about it, most academic research is done in cities like Houston, where there's a proximal population who can visit, right? Who can go to MD Anderson or go to Baylor College of Medicine or wherever, right? But I think that, to be democratic here, we need to also provide research opportunities and clinical trial opportunities to patients regardless of where they live, right? But the main thing they'll all say is, well, if I come, will there be something for me, right? Well, this would be a mechanism to start working on that problem. And it could be that, you need to drive north, but you skip St. Louis, you need to be in Chicago because the drug that's going to help you is in Chicago, not in St. Louis, right? Or in Indianapolis, or in Kansas City, right? So these are the kinds of things that ultimately, if we build it right, and it's invested in correctly, this could be a real engine for accelerating clinical trial accrual and also accelerating some of these diagnostic approaches that we think are so critical to solving the problem, getting the right drug to the right patient.
Right. And I think it's, I think there are other studies that exist, I think, which you mentioned, and but it's important for people to understand that, again, going back to the research is so complex, we do need a lot of these studies. This study is unique in that it gives patients the power. So I'm going to go through just really quickly a few slides that are up here. There might be a few questions that you may even have for me or that we may just want to hit. But the other thing to note is that we will, I believe, work to share these slides out. And this information is also available at mbcalliance.org, and there's also an MBC Connect website that actually you can go in right now and look at the data. So it's really there for you, and we're looking forward to having more people sign up over the next year and at our next conference as well. So as Dr. Ellis mentioned, the goal is to advance research into MBC by creating a platform that serves a link between patients and clinical researchers. So again, it's all about that collaboration. It's a real-time patient experience registry. There's multiple different surveys in there. It's all HIPAA encrypted. I mean, like I said, this took years to develop. This wasn't something that just was kind of done overnight, and there's a lot of thought and care put into it. And the other thing is that I think one of the things we heard when we were interviewing a lot of patients is, and I think this goes back to, again, what we were talking about, is that the key thing about this app is it has to give something back to patients. That's the number one thing. When the committees are meeting, when the advocates are reviewing, this can't just be a collect data, publish a paper, go on with our day. We are required at every point to be updating patients to give them input. So this is kind of how it works. You sign up the process and you consent to log in. Also note that you are able to opt out at any time. There's multiple surveys on demographics, disease history, quality of life, genetics and tumor mutations, which is one that I'm personally very excited about, especially for future. Clinical trial participation, and then I'll touch on clinical trials again in a moment. And then also, it's a really cool thing they developed inside the app for real-time treatment information. So you can actually input all your different treatments. So again, it allows you to really kind of chronologize your different treatments you've had over time and give you information as you're going into the clinic to see your provider. And then you're able to manage your profile. So these are a couple of screens just to give you an idea of what it looks like once you're logged in. You can download this on your iOS, iPhone, or on your Android. And then there's a 2.0 clinical trial matching that's going to be rolling out later this fall, which I think, again, talks about how this is evolving. You know, the app has now been out for a year, and it's constantly moving along. And so the next part is working on clinical trial matching for patients. So again, you're entering your data, and these algorithms are developed in collaboration with Breast Cancer Trials and Quantum Leap and Adaptive Health to really kind of look at, you know, how we can match patients with the right trials. I think, again, talking on how Dr. Ellis mentioned about, you know, these patients in rural areas, or maybe that they're not easily accessible to an NCI-designated cancer center or one of these ACCC sites that provide trials. They can actually find trials and literally go to those sites or take them to their provider and say, look, I really want to get on this trial. So these are kind of some screenshots of what that will look like. And it will actually, you can actually share the trials with your team. So I think that's really neat. Again, it's really working on connecting, again, the patient with the provider. How are we doing on time?
It's 12:35.
Okay, we're good on time then. That never happens, so all right, I like it. And so, Dr. Ellis, do you want to add anything else about the MBC Connect other than that we want them to sign up?
Yeah, I'll just say, you know, this is what we call an iterative process, right? Yeah. We're going to learn through the participation. We're going to learn about how the clinical trial matching works. We're going to learn and benchmark our progress over time. I think in 5 years' time, what's right now, you know, probably not the simplest thing to go through in the world, it'll become more efficient and more connected, and I think will make a major impact if we can get people to participate in it and learn from them. So all I can do is encourage people. People ask me all the time, what can I do to help patients with metastatic breast cancer? Well, the first thing is stand up and be counted. Participate in this activity, and then you never know, you might end up being benefited by it.
Right. Do you have any questions for Dr. Ellis?
Well, I just wanted to add that I really appreciate how much y'all involve advocates. I was invited to the MBC conference a few years ago when it was here in Houston, and I was part of a focus group or a small group that we were kind of talking about how could this work and what do we need to include, and there were patients in the room, and I just commend y'all for kind of building it and, you know, getting it out to who needs it, and then just like you say, it's an iterative process and we're learning from it. So I appreciate being part of those conversations, but more for the patients, kind of getting input on how to build it and make sure they can get information out of it and also to their provider as well. So.
Right, I think you touched on something that's important there to really mention too, and I'll discuss it again in a minute when reviewing the clinical trial slides, but that not only the conference is bringing in these advocates and researchers and clinicians, it's also MBC Alliance. These nonprofits really are working together. You know, Theresa's research does a lot of work with Komen Houston. You know, I'm really privileged to be a Komen advocate in science, and, you know, we're working with other groups as well. And so I think, again, it's going to take, as they say, the village to really make an impact. And so with that, because it is a clinical trial conversation, I want to just give some resources to people as well. So real quick, a couple other alliance initiatives that I want to talk about. Been very blessed to be involved for years with the MBC Alliance, and I'm very proud to share it out. I think they're really the ones that spearheaded a lot of this collaboration amongst all the nonprofits, and the amount of nonprofits now really focusing on metastatic is very exciting, and I'm very hopeful. So this is one tool. Please note, you can find all these tools on MBC Alliance's website. So it's mbcalliance.org. I think I have that right. And then, so this is one project that they've worked on. So there's a lot of different ones, but this is one I think that really tied in well with clinical trials. So, you know, when newly diagnosed, or even if you're in ongoing treatment, you know, we really encourage you to make sure that you follow the right track. So this is an initiative that's working in multiple cancers, but it just kind of helps guide patients to try to find the right team, the right test, and the right treatment. I think, again, it all goes into that advocacy and making sure that you're comfortable with who you're being seen, and making sure you're asking the right questions. And, you know, it's such an overwhelming diagnosis, so I think this is a really great tool that was developed, and I can encourage you to look at that some more. Another thing that was developed is by the Alliance is a clinical trial checklist. You can find this, the full checklist, and we'll send this out, I think, to the list of attendees. And again, you can find it the full list on the mbcalliance.org. But again, clinical trials are so daunting, and I think that's why you know, when I had the opportunity to be here with Komen Houston and Dr. Ellis today, I didn't want to just sit here and go through trial after trial, because you can do that at ASCO or ESMO or even San Antonio. But with that said, they're so daunting, clinical trials, which is why I didn't really want to get after it. And this checklist really developed by the Alliance helps guide people when considering a trial. Because I think something that I've observed over the years from people who are very successful at it, like Dr. Ellis or Dr. Rugo or Dr. Pluart, is they have these conversations from day one with their navigators, with their whole entire teams about trials. They're not just going in at the last hour saying, this might work for you. They're talking about them all the time. And so this list will get you more comfortable with it. And then another tool that I want to talk a lot about is that the metastatic trial search. So this is an initiative developed by breastcancertrials.org, but then again, mentioning the great work of the MBC Alliance, we've worked with different partners. So this is a search engine that allows you to find trials, and it's much more for a lay audience. And actually, I think a lot of clinicians even use it, and navigators, because it's a lot easier to navigate than clinicaltrials.gov. And what's cool is this sits on Theresa's research website, it sits on Susan G. Komen's website, it sits on a lot of different websites, so you don't even just have to go to breastcancertrials.org or metastatic trial search. You can really find it in a lot of different places, and it again shows these different organizations working together to help people better understand trials. Again, recognizing that it's complex, the group at breastcancertrials.org, through the help of the Alliance and many other supporters, realized that we needed to educate people about research, which is, I think, what we've been trying to do today. And so they developed a thing called Metastatic Trial Talk. And so each month they highlight different research, different conferences, and again, the different partners, so that, again, there's a better understanding about trials. I think when you have an understanding from the beginning, it's much easier than when you're going in kind of, you know, late in the game. So these are two different tools that I recommend you really check out, and again, encourage you to share them with other people. Again, that's the really key in how you can make a difference. Another one to mention is that, again, Susan G. Komen recognized that one other way to help would be to have a helpline. And what's here, these are licensed social workers, is that right, Jenny? So I think it's really great that, you know, even though we have these websites and these tools that help make it a little bit easier, and certain clinics that are able to help people better understand it, but also you can call a helpline like this to help better understand it, and kind of go through that. So again, it's really all about developing a better understanding of clinical trials and the resources that are out there. You know, you can't just say, go on a clinical trial, or we need more participation. We need to give people tools like these and like MBC Connect in order to get more involved. Is there any questions about these resources or anything you would like to add, Dr. Ellis?
Not particularly. I mean, I think we all want to see outcomes improved in metastatic breast cancer. I mean, from my perspective, it's one of the biggest unsolved problems in human health. And the solutions are not straightforward, otherwise we'd have got to the answer. Because it's difficult and complicated, we need to think outside the box to come up with solutions much sooner than a disconnected approach will generate. So I think this sort of thing is absolutely essential. Making sure that we understand what patients are facing, making sure we understand what those tumors are they're suffering from, making sure every patient who has the interest to participate in clinical research, not just in trials, but also in clinical research, understanding their tumor in the way I described, making sure those patients have that wish fulfilled is something that I'm passionate about, and I know Komen are too.
I think one other question to you would be, I think going on off some of these things is, I think there's a lot of hot debate right now about second opinions, and I think, again, it goes back to patients advocating for themselves. And obviously, I know you see a lot of second opinions in your practice, and as do others, especially in the med center here. So is there anything you just kind of touch on that about, people when they're getting this diagnosis, about if they're unsure about, seeking a second opinion, whether it be in their area or, obviously you have people travel from all over the U.S. and abroad to see you.
Yes, and it's a little overwhelming, I have
to
say.
Yes, exactly.
So it's not an open invitation for absolutely everyone to come and see me, because that wouldn't be physically possible. But I guess what we're really trying to do is break down the components of the second opinion process and embed it into a tool like this, right? So it's systematized, but it's also documented, right? So that, and it could be that ultimately, the output of the tool is, have you considered going to X, Y, and Z place that's not too far away, where your tumor could be sampled, or you could look into your situation a bit more carefully. I mean, one of the things about second opinions, the problem with metastatic breast cancer is it's not a static illness,
right?
Right? So it becomes sort of like a running second opinion, because new things happen to people,
right?
Circumstances change, newer mutations appear. So it's not very straightforward. Certainly, within our capacity, Baylor and other institutions like it at the medical center will do a lot of this kind of work, because still it's very manual, right? And still it requires a lot of explanation. But maybe before you arrive at a second opinion, you could have already put your data there, because then that becomes a collaborative opportunity. You could say, well, to your friend, this happened to me the other day. A patient came to see me 6 months ago. She was doing relatively okay. 6 months later, she's not, and she needs to go on a new trial, but she'd flown to me from Virginia. So I said, okay, well, near Virginia, there's Georgetown University and there's Johns Hopkins University. So then we hop on the phone and say, well, this trial that she needs, do you have it open? And it turns out the trial was open at Johns Hopkins University. She's going to get the experimental drug there. Right? So if you think about all the components of that and how many phone calls that took, maybe some of these tools that have been designed here could have made all those decisions for her, right? Because all I did was know who was doing what, because I'm in the field.
Right.
But imagine how many patients like that are out there who never get that opportunity.
Right. You can only see so many patients, and
right. But if you can turn out you can turn that second, you can break down the second opinion process, work out what the information elements were, get that, and it's mainly what's required of you to enter into the website, and then the machine will connect you, and maybe she could have gone direct to Hopkins. You didn't know how to go to Hopkins via Houston, right? So that's really what we're trying to achieve here, and I think if we can, we'll have done a huge service.
So I think these tools really, at the end of the day, it's really creating a more collaborative approach and not some of these like individual things. I think if we can have more collaborative tools, then we can reach more patients and make more of an impact. So I really appreciate your time. I think I don't have any more questions for for yourself, and I know you have to run to many things. I think we're going to wrap up here with just, I have to do a shameless plug for next year's medical conference. So we're going to be in Utah and Salt Lake City with the Huntsman Cancer Institute. I'm really excited about that. And of course, many of our nonprofit partners like Susan G. Komen will be a part of that as well. And we really look forward to that. And we're excited to work with Dr. Alana Whelm, who's at Huntsman and as a Baylor grad. So we're really looking forward to that. And I think that's a fun thing about this conference, and a stressful thing for me, but fun in that we get to move around each year. So this year we were with Mayo Clinic, and I think, as Dr. Ellis mentioned, Johns Hopkins, the year before we were at Hopkins. So I think, again, it also helps put these institutions in one another's minds, and it brings friends together and creates more collaboration. So you can find more information at metastatic breast cancer, metastaticbreast.org, and you can also reach out to myself or Jenny about that. Couple save the dates. So again, really excited about Komen Houston's commitment to metastatic breast cancer, and it's been really a lot of fun to work with them on these things collaboratively with the foundation and with Baylor, and of course our friends across the street at Anderson. So there's a webinar on the 20th, as Julie mentioned, and we're really excited to see that webinar. We had that speaker at the conference, and she's wonderful. And then we're excited on the second annual South Central Metastatic Breast Cancer Conference will be February 7th and 8th, 2020, and we've roped in Dr. Ellis and Dr. Tripathi to participate as well this year, as well as a great group of that. And again, I think going back to it, the one thing I want to add about that I'm really proud about is that, Jenny and I kind of are the behind-the-scenes people on that conference. However, we recognized over a year and a half ago, in order to really do this, we had to get patients involved. So though we're, Komen Houston, Baylor, Teresa's research, and the Anderson are behind the scenes, it's actual patients living with the disease that are driving this conference. So I'm really proud to be a part of that, and I'm grateful for Komen's commitment to that. With that, I'll take it over to Jenny or Julie for any last comments. And again, just thank you so much for having us here, and we look forward to working with you on the next project.
Thank you all that are out on the webinar for being with us. We're really proud to kick off this webinar with Dr. Ellis and Josh Newby. And we did record the webinar, so we will be available on our website. We'll also send the slide deck and my email if you have additional questions or need resources, as well as like the resources that Josh talked about. And so we want to continue this conversation, and we hope you can join us on November 20th when we are at MD Anderson talking about side effects, management of side effects kind of right before the holidays when everyone gets run down, and if there's ways to manage it better, we wanted to talk about it with one of our experts in palliative care and side effect management. So we'll see you on November 20th. And Julie, do you want to add anything?
No, I just want to thank both of you and thank everyone who participated via the web. I think this was it's a great thing, and technology is a good thing, like you said. So it brings us all closer together. So thank you.
All right. Okay, well, we're going to end right now.
All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye, Josh.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Have a good day.
This is Sharon Anderson.
Bye, everybody. And mine.
Hi, Ann.
Thanks so much, Charna. Have a good one.
To everybody there, one thing I was going to add is you were talking about researchers and advocates working together. Komen AIS has put together a toolkit for researchers and advocates working together. That can be accessed from the website.
Okay, thank you, Ann.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.